Okay, here's the brand new hot off the press video for this. I've done it once, so hopefully this will go smoothly and hopefully better. All right, now this is going to be a very short video just on how to set up a project that you would be intending for print output, and this may become a very common thing for you depending on what sort of role Illustrator plays for you in your future. For me, I am, constantly doing work for projects that involve a print process or production. So there are several things that I either create or that end up being part of some sort of pre-package that might be given to me by an agency or a producer or whatever. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about setting up a project from scratch. And in this particular example, we're going to be setting up the project for your or the document for your final project, which is going to be a magazine layout. So according to the assignments and the specifications that I give you in the description, there are a few things that we need to do. And I'm just going to open up a new file in Illustrator, and I guess I will call it my last name, Twig, final mag. Oh, let's see here. F11. I think that should do it. That should do it, sure. So the document profile that I'm going to be having you guys follow is a print profile. And we have our size, which is going to be a legal, which is, if I change it to inches, you'll see that it's 8.5 by 14. And what we want to make sure we do is to switch our orientation so that it's a landscape instead of a portrait format. So it ends up being 14 inches wide, 8.5 inches tall. So it's going to be a little bit longer than a normal sheet of paper, which would fold in half very nicely for a magazine layout. And the next thing that we're going to be looking at is bleed. And bleed is something that becomes very important in the world of print. And generally when you send something to press, like a magazine ad or even a cover design for a magazine, and then into smaller things like CD designs or DVD and so on. We need to be concerned with this idea of a bleed. And what a bleed is it takes your document dimensions, and in this case it's 14 inches wide by 8.5 inches tall, and you're allowed to extend sort of the artboard kind of invisibly, or kind of like by pretend, so that when you have graphics or photographs, that sort of a thing, that they go beyond the initial artboard dimensions, the 14 by 8.5, so that when the document goes through a press, it is printed in a way in which the next step would be to cut it. A lot of times, print projects are done on larger sheets of paper, and so it needs to undergo the knife, and the knife will trim it so that it's the proper size for the magazine or the DVD cover, whatever. And to ensure that when the blade goes through and cuts your image down to the proper size, that you have no like awkward white areas in case the knife is not cutting exactly where it needs to be, which is super common. The cutting devices at print shops are never spot on. They will shift left or right or up or down or both. And to make sure that you don't see like white paper on an edge because it accidentally sliced your machine off to the left a little bit, we do something where we introduce bleed, and that just makes sure that we push images beyond the initial artboard dimensions where things will be cut. So a bleed typically is 0.125 inches. And you could just set it to that right away just by hitting the up on the little up arrow on the bleed thing, and you can see that you can go as far as you want. Bleeds could be greater, but generally it is most common practice in the print world to have it be 0.125 inches, which is an eighth of an inch. So we're going to have an eighth of an inch on the top, an eighth of an inch on the bottom, and left and right, and that equals a quarter inch vertically and horizontally. The other thing that we're going to be working with on this project, and this is strictly for the practice of preparing for a full 4-color press, which would be like sending your project off to Artcraft in Great Falls or something like that, which is not uncommon. If you get involved at a ad agency or design firm, whatever, you'll be doing work for clients where the project needs to be sent off for a full color press. It's not just something you're going to ship off to Kinko's or whatever to have printed, there, and then you trim it with your scissors or something. To ensure that the project is set up properly for the assembly of different plates, generally done on metal, but there's other materials that they're done on, in the 4 colors of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, then you have to make sure that your document is set up that way. And then some of the next tutorials that I'll be giving you will talk about how to make sure that all the supportive artwork is also appropriately set up for that color space. So color mode needs to be CMYK. Raster effects like drop shadows, glows, that sort of thing, all need to be at 300 pixels per inch. This is important information found under Advanced. If you don't see it, just click on the Advanced button and it'll kick it open, and you'll see that there. So to set up our document and make sure that it's per specifications for this final project, we have to make sure that we choose our legal size. It is a landscape, and that we have a bleed set up of an eighth of an inch for all of our different dimensions. Color mode CMYK, raster effects at 300. So when I hit OK, what we end up seeing is darn it, move you over. There we go. You see the artboard just like you would normally. It's the black outline here. So there's basically the trim area of what should be represented in my magazine layout. But this red line now that goes around the edge is the bleed. And so when I set up the 1/8 inch on left and right, top and bottom, that's what this ends up being. So you can imagine that this 1/8 inch and the 1/8 inch on the right end up equaling a quarter, and the 1/8 inch top and bottom equal a quarter as well. So the document now, instead of being 8.5 by 14, is actually 8 3/4 by 14 1/4. That's the new dimension that you have to be you have to program that into your head, so that if say you're doing a magazine spread that has an image that will cover both pages from left to right floor to ceiling, top to bottom, whatever, you have to make sure that image will at least expand to those dimensions. So that's the bleed. Any photos that are going to be tucked in along an edge or along half of a page, you need to make sure that they extend beyond the boundaries and go out there. And the thing that you also need to remember is that you should not be scaling them up to fit. They should natively format themselves to be accepted into this dimension. We'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so this bleed is not a layer. It's not something that you can see anywhere. It's just part of your document. What we are going to do is we're going to set up some guides for us that will help us make sure that we keep design elements such as text, titles, supporting graphics, and so on within a safety margin in which they will not be affected if the blade that cuts this thing up to be its fixed size doesn't stray inwards in the design. So the bleed that we see around the edge is for the outside in case there's any stray of the blade. And then we're going to set up something called gutters, which will be safety margins for the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a box, and I'm going to take the rectangle tool. I'm going to make sure that my fill is set to none and that my stroke is set to a color which is kind of obnoxious. So I'm just going to take this CMYK magenta, which I think is the same color they use for your bleed. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click once on the screen. It's going to say, okay, what size would you like? And I have to do a little bit of math here. I have to say my document is 14 inches long and 8.5 inches tall. And the gutter that I'm going to be setting up, the sort of inside safety margin, is going to be the same margin as my bleed. It's going to be an 1/8 inch on the left, on the right, on the top, and the bottom. So that's going to equal 1/4 inch for my width and my height. So if I had 14 inches wide, but I need to subtract 1/4 inch, then that's going to be 13.75 inches. And then for my height, if it's 8.5 inches tall, and I need to take out 1/4, then it's going to be 8.25 inches. And as soon as I hit OK, then it gives me this box, and depending on where I clicked, it's just going to sort of put it somewhere where it shouldn't be. And this is when the align tool becomes super important. So I'm going to make sure that my align, I'll use my selection tool just to make sure that we all see it. My align setting is set to artboard. I am going to center horizontal, and I'm going to center vertical. And that ends up making sure that it's perfectly placed within the boundaries of my artboard, and it's going to be equally spaced on the left, the right, the top, and the bottom. This element that I set up, this gutter, I would like to put in its own layer. So I'm going to go, with it selected, I'm going to go to my layer window, and I'm going to click on New Layer. So I end up having layer 2. And with that artwork selected, I can see that layer 1 has selected artwork. There's that little square that is next to whatever. It's on the far right of that thing, which means that, hey, anything that you have inside this layer that's selected will be represented by the square. If you want to do anything with it, you could just simply move it into a new layer. So as I drag that little square up, I don't have to open up my layer at all. All I have to do is just select that square and push it up into the new layer. I'm gonna open that up. I am going to rename that gutter. Whoa, that's not how you spell gutter. Gutter. Okay, I would like to lock it so that I can't move it, can't select it, can't do anything like that. And the new layer that I made, I'm going to double click on that. And I'm going to name it, I'm going to name it Guides. And with this layer, what's important is that eventually I come back to this. I'm going to leave it, I'm not going to mess with it right now because I'll come back and do this. But eventually I'm going to set up lock, and I'm going to make sure it's not printed. Okay, so those are things that make sure that I can't select them and move them once I set up my entire guide system. But that also that they won't show up when I choose to print. So this is kind of cool. You choose to make it non-printable, which means that no matter what artwork I have in here, if this layer is still turned on, invisible, that when I choose print or save PDF, whatever, it will not be a part of it. So I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. I'll turn print off for now just because. So gutter is all set, and since it's locked, I would not be able to select it. If I try to select it, it won't do it because that layer is locked. Now the next guide that we're going to make is going to be a division between our pages. So the assignment that you're going to be doing for your final project is going to be a magazine spread, which means, you know, kind of like a centerfold or something like that, but it doesn't necessarily be a centerfold. It could be, you know, on page 20 and 21 or something like that. But anyways, your artwork and all the elements will carry over from one page to the next, but we need to know where that division is. So I'm going to take my line tool and I'm going to draw a vertical line, and if I hold down shift, it keeps it perfectly constrained. Alright, so there's that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a few alignment options. So I'm going to make sure that my alignment is set to artboard. I'm going to choose to go with my horizontal center, vertical center, and this is where the page break would be. And this is important for me to know just as I go to set up my elements. And one last thing that I like to do is make sure that line is selected. I'm going to go to stroke. I'm going to make it a dashed line. I'm going to make it a 5 by 5 dashed line. So with a 5 by 5 dash line, it means I have 5 pixels on, 5 pixels off, and that's the dash pattern. And so with this division set up now, this is something that's in my guides folder. I'm going to go over there, I'm going to select that layer, double click on it, and I'm going to call that my center. I will also lock that. And the very last thing is a box to show me the gutter from the center of this page. And you know, I could go back and make 2 boxes for my first page and my second page, or I could just make a new one that kind of gives me my gutter. I'm going to show you both ways, and you pick the one that you want, because one of them is a little cleaner than the other. It involves a little more math. But I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a box basically that's sort of around my page split. And it doesn't need to be perfect because we're gonna set that up. I do not want dash lines, so I'll turn that off. But what I do need is to make sure that it equals a 1/4 inch, because this is a gutter off of the center of the page, and it needs to be consistent with the gutter around the rest of my layout. So I'm going to use my control bar for this. And the first thing I'll do is I will just look at, is it aligned to the artboard, and I'd like to just align it vertically. I'm not going to line it horizontally yet because I need to make sure that it has the proper dimensions. So I'm going to my control bar, I'm looking along over here, and this shows me where my X and my Y coordinates are for the placement of, and this is its reference point, the top left. So that's not important. I don't care about that right now. What I do care about is that the width equals a 1/4 inch, and somehow mine magically equaled a 1/4 inch. That's cool. How did I get so lucky? I really don't know. Height does not matter. What matters is width. So there's a 1/4 inch, which means that split over the center, it'll be 1/8 of an inch on both sides. And that'll be consistent with this safety margin that we put around the entire documents inside. So at this point, I would like to center it to the horizontal center of the document. I click on it, and it's good. Everything's good. Dang, that's cool. Okay, so now what I would do is I would name that path like inside gutter, inside gutter. So that's kind of a quick way to do it. The other way would be to do the math so that I had a single box that was the gutter guide from page 1, and then another identical box that is the gutter guide for page 2. And if that's something you want to do, and I only suggest you do it because it's cleaner, then I would deal with the first one that I made. I'll turn those off for now. This first one that I made, the height is correct, but the width is not. The document being 14 inches, split down the center. I guess I'll just show the center so that we can reference it. Cuts my document into two 7-inch pages. So if I consider page 1 a 7-inch page, and I know that I need to subtract two 1/8-inch gutters horizontally, that equals a 1/4 of an inch, then the width of this first gutter box should be 6 3/4. So I'm going to go up to my control panel here and go to my width, and I'm going to say the width for this is going to be 6.75. I hope this is right. Yeah, that's right. Totally right. When I hit enter, because my reference point was set to the top left, it sucked it in this way. And so now you could see that there's an even margin, this gutter that exists here, all the way sort of fluidly throughout top, bottom, and sides. So it would be a good time for me to select that, copy it, and move it over. But what I need to do is I need to make sure that this is appropriately placed so that, because I just kind of eyeballed it right now, but how do I know it's where it exactly needs to be? And this is the cool thing about Illustrator, is that there's technical information here, and it's not like crazy. It exists in the control bar, and it's all about coordinates, width and height and all that stuff. And reference point. So if I said, hey, reference point, let's put you on the top right. Where are you? God, why am I getting so lucky? I shouldn't be so lucky. Snapping on? Yeah, snapping's on. That's why. It's one of those times when I actually appreciate snap. But in the event that it is not appropriately placed where it should be, I should be able to do the math, saying that the top right corner, this guy right here, this reference point, should be 1/8 of an inch away from the end. And this is a 14-inch document, which would mean that it needs to exist at 13.875 inches where my X value is. So I got lucky. It's just right there because snapping was on. But the coordinate value needs to be 13.875. And that now places two of these elements as my gutter, which is a little cleaner instead of having that box up there. So the great test is to turn on the box of the inside gutter and just to see if things line up. If things line up, then you've done things correctly. If they're not lined up, then you've done things incorrectly. At this point, I can throw away the inside gutter and I have gutter left, gutter right. I could name those if I wanted to. Double click on it, and this will be gutter left. I think that's the left one. Yep. And then gutter right. Just so I know. But now I'm going to lock all of those. I'm just going to click on guides and lock them. And now these are elements that I cannot select because they're locked. And it also exists in a layer that has been set up to be locked and not print. So I set lock as a enabled attribute, and I unchecked print. So the dotted line, these little pink guys, will not show up if I ever print this or save it as a PDF or as a JPEG or anything like that. So the cool thing about this is that it's a real easy way for you to set up your document to make sure that you're consistent in your safety margins. We'll get into some other alignment stuff later where you can deal with other gutters within text boxes and text fields and that sort of thing. And then just general sort of design, layout, alignment things, making sure that things, elements are appropriately placed and flowing throughout your document. So at this point, this new Illustrator document is all set to go. It's ready for me to do my print layout. And the important thing as you move on with your work is to make sure that the guides layer stays on top of everything else. Because as I pull in an image to use a background, or as I start using solids that I create in Illustrator, whatever, those should all be underneath it, because it's going to be kind of important for me to know that if I had a solid color that I'm pulling in, I'm going to set it to my bleed. I'm just going to drag it all the way across. And it's underneath it. And because it's underneath it, that means that those guides on top will stand out, and they'll be there for me to use as I start to lay out my images, my text, my graphics, and so on. So that's kind of a critical step in setting up your template for this thing. Alright, so that's the end of this first video, and we'll move on to some other print stuff next.